Welcome to Let's Talk Learning Technology. Do you know the latest in learning technology? Matt and Walter do. From learning authoring tools and animation to virtual reality and everything in between, innovative learning groups Matt Kurtin and Walter Schirmacher geek out on all of it. Get their perspectives on the latest trends, tips and tricks, and recommendations so your learning tech keeps up with the times.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Learning Technology, or as we affectionately refer to it, LT Squared. I'm Walter Schirmacher, ILG's programmer and one of LT2's co-hosts.
And I'm the other co-host, Matt Kurtin, ILG Senior Director of Technology and Visual Design.
Today's episode is all about quality assurance testing. We're going to talk about what we can do to make QA testing easier, more robust, and more reliable.
That's right, Walter. Let me just start by saying that QA testing is important. After you've put in all that work on the design, the programming, the graphics, the audio, and the editing, the last thing you want is learners to have a bad experience because of functionality errors or poor performance.
Today we have 7 QA testing tips.
What's the first one, Walter?
Tip number 1, start with the end in mind. So why is it important to start with the end in mind?
Well, you're not going to be able to tell if something is really accurately fulfilling all the requirements or working properly if it isn't clear what the requirements are. When we're starting to develop something for learning, we want to make sure that we understand what web browsers it's going to work with, what screen size need to be supported. Is it going to be laptops and tablets? Is it going to be phones? What are the connection speeds? All of these things that you need to know, because you don't know what you're checking to make sure if it's right if you don't know what right is. And really, if you pair these functionality type standards with design standards, you're going to be able to provide clear and relevant guidelines to what a QA tester should be confirming when they do the testing. It's going to help with development all the way along the way. That's going to bring us to tip number 2, use a checklist. Walter, I know you love using a checklist to make sure that you don't miss things during a testing, as do I. What are some of the best practices you've seen with quality assurance checklists?
I really like to maintain an ongoing exhaustive list of things to check, which I refine over time. When we are testing courses, sometimes these things can be anywhere from 50 to 100 to hundreds of pages each. And if you just try and go off memory, did I check that? You won't remember. So
yeah, and it's not only the length of the course, it's how many things we're checking for, because we're trying to make sure everything is absolutely right, from the fonts to the graphics to the coding and scripting, so it would be easy to miss something without a checklist.
That's true. Especially, and there's also, of course, the whole part about different clients have different standards, and there's different requirements, and so you're testing against their specific client requirements and needs, and that can be hard to keep track of in your head. So having it written down and have it in front of you is very important. So, also, if you create a checklist earlier in the process, you can use it so things are always more right earlier in the process as you go, because it costs less to fix things at the design part than in development, and then less to fix it in the first draft versus the final draft. If you find an error in the final draft and you have audio, you got to re-record the audio, versus if you find that error in the design phase or even in the early development phase when maybe you have scratch audio, you can make the fix and it's a lot cheaper. You always want to try to avoid spot checking. Your testing is always much more reliable if you check everything. If you check 6 questions and the next 3 look to be the same, you can't make the assumption that they are the same. You really need to check all 9 of them. A good checklist always tells you not only what to check, but also why you're checking it. For instance, why am I trying to make sure that it's only using certain fonts? What's the importance of that? Well, if I go and look and say, hey, this is supposed to only be using Arial and Helvetica, and now I'm seeing 4 or 5 other different fonts used in here, it's possible that some of the pages are laid out differently, or the text is overrunning, or other things could be happening, or maybe it won't display properly. You never know.
Yeah, I know what you mean, Walter, because if you have multiple people who are doing the QA testing, anything that you can do in order to make it clear what should be checked and how to check it is going to help it make their job easier to do it.
Tip number 3, divide and conquer. This sounds like a war tip more than a QA tip, but so how does this help?
So sometimes I'll call this divide and conquer, or you can think of that saying, many hands make light work. If there's a lot to do in the testing, it's going to take a lot of time. One thing that you're helping is just getting more people so you can get it done faster. But more importantly than that, you can get some advantages if you divide up who's testing what, and you really put it in so that the person who has expertise in that area is checking for that thing. So the graphic designer is checking that the layouts are right. The media developer is checking that the interactions are right, and then maybe the programmer is checking the behind-the-scenes things and the detailed code. Is that right? Let's see. Tip number 4: use the force. No, wait, that's not right. As great as that would be, tip number 4 should be not use the force, use the source. Walter, why is it useful to use the source when quality assurance testing?
I thought you were going to say use the Schwartz, but that would be getting us back to a different movie. So using the source is actually a good tip, because if you test without looking at the source code, you can result in a lot of trial and error, because you're just trying to click things and try to figure out what could be happening. And it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. The problem might be easy to see if you look in the source file and say, hey, there's the error, versus like, I don't know where the error is, or I don't know what's wrong. Often if you look at the source code, you can immediately see something's wrong, like red code that says unassigned, indicating that a variable was supposed to be set to a value, but either the code was never finished or the variable was accidentally deleted.
Yep. And in addition to using the source, you could also use the publish folder. And when I'm talking about that, I don't mean just like going through the course. I mean actually looking at the files that are in the publish folder. Because if you understand what's in that published folder, you can look and you can see things like there's missing documents that aren't going to load maybe compared to what's in the script files that say they're going to load documents. And you can look at the file sizes and the bit rates and see if your images are going to take too long to load or if the videos are going to take too long to load. So I think looking at the source code and looking at the published code are both advantages that you can find a lot more issues than if you just go through the course like a learner. Okay, tip number 5, fix what you find. So I'll take this one, Walter. So if you have a quality assurance tester going in to find things, and then they can just fix it right when they find it, it can be a much more efficient process than trying to log what you find. You can imagine some of the things you find, it'd be easier to do a few keystrokes and fix it, but you might have to write sentences to explain to somebody else what's the fix. And then, if you give those instructions and somebody goes to make that fix other than you right at that point, you probably got to come back and check the list again to make sure that you really found them all.
What about, though, if you keep finding the same error, like every time you test Joe's course, you keep finding the same problem over and over again? Should we just keep fixing it, or do you think we should maybe, in that case, write something down?
Well, I like Joe, and I haven't found that many problems in Joe's course.
He's usually reliable, but...
So I understand what you're saying, generic Joe.
Yeah.
So the issue is whether it's the same person's problem over and over again, or across developers, you're seeing that there's things that you want to have fixed, and you're seeing them again and again. The thing to do is communicate back to the developers and let them know, I'm seeing a lot of this issue. Here's what you need to do to fix it before it comes in, because it goes back to your point before about the earlier we can fix it in the process, the less kind of rework we have to do of redesign, redevelop, etc., re-record before we get there. So that continued maintenance of the exhaustive list, where we go back and improve the checklist and we update what it is we're checking for, and we make it more clear how to check for it properly and why we're checking for it, we can reduce what makes it to being found in QA. Let's see, where are we? Tip number 6. All right, this one is be every learner. So, Walter, what are you watching out for when you are being every learner?
When I think about being every learner, I like to think about it's not just me testing it. I need to put myself in other people's shoes and think about the audience of who's actually going to be taking these courses. I mean, not every 2 learners are the same. Well, we can always assume that some learners will go faster, others are going to go slower. When looking at pop-up content, some learners will go in reading order from left to right, and some will just go all over the page. The learning should work, though, in all cases. We have to pay particular attention to make sure instructions are clear and accurate. We want to make sure we don't rely on learners remembering them for too long. So if you tell them to do something and then you wait like 10 minutes and then they're supposed to do it, it's probably too long.
I mean, I would go even further than that and say we can be helpful by breaking the instructions down to like one step at a time. We give you the instruction. When you've done that step, we'll give you the next one. I don't really like those courses that say, you're going to do this and this and this, and then you'll click submit, and then you'll do this. If we can break the instructions down so you have just what you need, just when you need it, it makes a better experience, I feel.
Yeah. I think a good example of that in non-learning is if you've ever tried to put together furniture, and they give you a paragraph to explain what you're trying to do, I have no idea what it means. But when the furniture instructions just give you a sentence at a time and say, do this, do that, and then the next thing, I understand it much better. So tip number 7, we should stock up on testing tools. Matt, can you name the tools?
So I can tell you some of the tools that we use. One of them is Browser Stack that we can use to test on virtual devices. So if we want to make sure it's going to work on all the tablets and phones, we don't have to own all those tablets and phones or have them set up to be able to do the testing. Another thing that we use is Chrome or Edge development tools that would allow us to debug what's going on in the published course and look behind the scenes at how long it's taking things to load and that sort of stuff. And then one of my favorites, particularly for testing how things are going to work on the learning management system, is SCORM Cloud, which is going to allow you to test whether bookmarking and completion tracking are working. And although the name is SCORM Cloud, it's not only SCORM. They also will let you test, in addition to SCORM 1.2 and SCORM 2004, also AICC tracking or XAPI or CMI5 tracking. And without those tools, you'd have to really load it into different learning management systems to make sure it's going to work.
So what do you do for those tools if someone says, hey, we really need to test to make sure this is going to work for people with certain learning disabilities or certain visual impairments or something? What do you do then?
Yeah, so I also have what's called a JAWS reader that can help to test for how it will read the text aloud. So we do have some accounting for that as well.
That's very good. Well, Matt, those were some awesome tips.
Walter, why don't we run through them one more time from the top?
The Magnificent 7?
Yes, please.
Tip number 1, start with the end in mind.
Tip number 2, use a checklist.
Tip number 3, divide and conquer.
Tip number 4, use the source.
Tip number 5 is fix what you find.
Tip number 6, be every learner.
And tip number 7 is stock up on testing tools.
Magnificent indeed.
Very magnificent. If our listeners want to learn more about quality assurance testing, we posted some resources at the bottom of this episode's page. Also, if you have any learning technology topics you'd like us to talk about, Matt and I are on Twitter. You can also send us an email at marketing@innovativelg.com.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Tune in to our next episode, which will be about advanced Captivate tips and tricks.
It'll be captivating.